Picture an actor in 1927. He has spent years perfecting a language that needs no words. He knows exactly when to tilt his head, how to raise an eyebrow with surgical precision, how to drop his shoulders in a way that communicates defeat before the music even confirms it. His entire career has been built on what his body can say. And now, someone in a boardroom is telling him that audiences want to hear him, that there is a microphone, that his voice matters, that everything he has learned will have to coexist with something he has never once rehearsed in front of a camera. The story of sound in cinema does not begin with a technical breakthrough. It begins with that discomfort. Before synchronized sound became the industry standard, going to the movies was a very particular kind of audio experience. Theaters were not silent. In the big city cinemas, a live orchestra accompanied every screening. In mid-sized theaters, a pianist improvised or followed a score written specifically for the film. In smaller venues, there were narrators who described the action out loud, or filled in what the title cards could not quite convey. Sound existed. What did not exist was any precise synchronization between what you saw and what you heard. Silent cinema had developed a remarkably sophisticated visual language. Directors understood that the image had to carry the full emotional weight without any verbal support. Acting was more physical, more expressive, encoded in gesture and posture. Editing generated rhythm and tension in ways that later cinema did not always match with the same energy. The composition of shots, the lighting, the title cards placed at exactly the right moments, all of it operated within a system that had its own rules and its own aesthetic. It was not an incomplete form of cinema. It was a form of cinema. The technical challenge was never simply about making movies talk. It was about making them talk in a way that could be reproduced reliably. Synchronizing image and sound in a single screening, with live musicians present, was already possible. But replicating that experience across hundreds of different theaters, with different projectors and no live musicians at each showing, was an entirely different problem. The sound had to be recorded, fixed in place, and match exactly what appeared on screen, show after show, in any city. Attempts to combine image and sound went back decades. Edison had worked in that direction in the late 19th century with the kinetophone, a system that tried to synchronize a phonograph with moving images. The results were limited, and the system never caught on. In the years that followed, there were other experiments, other patents, other promises that never quite delivered. The technology kept advancing, but the industry was profitable without synchronized sound, and that removed any real urgency to change. What finally shifted things was not just an invention. It was a business decision made from a position of weakness. Warner Brothers in the 1920s was not the studio it would eventually become. It was a mid-tier operation with fewer resources than its major competitors, looking for a way to stand out while also cutting costs. Live music in every theater was expensive. If sound could be recorded and played back mechanically, theaters could eliminate the cost of orchestra salaries. Warner placed its bet on the Vitaphone system, developed in partnership with Western Electric and Bell Telephone Laboratories. Vitaphone did not record sound onto the film itself. Instead, it used large-format gramophone discs that were mechanically synchronized with the projector. It was a clever solution, but a fragile one. If a disc got scratched, or if the projectionist lost sync, image and sound would drift apart. The system had real limitations, but it worked. In 1926, the studio released Don Juan, starring John Barrymore. The film had no recorded dialogue, but it did have something no commercially distributed film had offered before: a complete orchestral score recorded on Vitaphone discs, along with synchronized sound effects. Audiences could hear the music without needing a live orchestra in the building. It was a genuine step forward. but it was not the breaking point. That came the following year. The Jazz Singer opened in October 1927 and was not, for the most part, a talking picture. It had title cards and performances rooted in the silent tradition. But in certain moments, Al Jolson sang, and he spoke. What audiences heard in those sequences was not simply a voice synchronized with a moving image. It was the feeling that there was a real person on the other side of the screen. Jolson looked into the camera and said simple things between songs. Lines that were partly improvised, delivered with the ease of someone who had spent years working a live crowd. That informality, that sense of direct contact, was what shook people. The distance between the audience and what was happening on screen had collapsed in a way no one had anticipated. The commercial success was decisive. Warner recouped its investment many times over, and the message reached every corner of the industry. Studios that had been watching cautiously suddenly moved fast. By 1928, sound film production was accelerating. By 1929, silent cinema was in retreat. The transition was rapid and in many ways brutal. Studios had to rebuild themselves from the inside out. Cameras produced a mechanical noise that was devastating to audio recording. The solution was to enclose them in large soundproofed boxes that eliminated the noise but severely restricted how the camera could move. Long tracking shots, fluid camera movements, the camera following characters through a space, all of it became far more difficult. Many early sound films were more static than their silent predecessors. The camera stayed still. Actors moved toward the microphone. Cinema had to relearn how to hold still before it could learn how to move again. The microphones created their own problems. They were large, not particularly sensitive, and difficult to hide on a set. Actors had to position themselves with a degree of precision in relation to them, which changed how they occupied a space. Sets had to be designed with acoustics in mind, not just appearance. Sound design began shaping production decisions in ways that had never existed before. The impact on silent film stars was uneven and sometimes ruthless. Some had voices that matched the image audiences had built around them. Others did not. There were actors with strong foreign accents who had built international careers precisely because silent cinema required no spoken English. Now the voice was part of the character. The language problem became urgent almost overnight. Multiple versions of the same film, shot separately with different casts in different languages, were a transitional fix, expensive and logistically complicated. Over time, dubbing and subtitles became the practical tools for international distribution. But the transformation of the global film market was deep and lasting. Performance itself changed in fundamental ways. The broad, expressive gestures that read so clearly across a silent screen began to feel excessive once dialogue was in the room. Cinema moved closer to the way people actually talk and move. That created space for genres that depended on language. Fast-talking comedies where the rhythm of the dialogue was the engine of the humor, the musical as a fully integrated experience of image and sound, and gangster films where the way a character spoke told you as much about him as any physical action. There were serious voices that pushed back. Charles Chaplin was the most prominent, arguing that sound cinema would diminish the visual language that had taken so much work to develop. He continued making films without dialogue years after the rest of the industry had moved on, and he was not wrong about everything he pointed out. In the early years, many sound films were aesthetically weaker than what silent cinema had achieved at its most mature. Visual energy had been partially traded for verbal energy, and not every director knew how to balance the two. But cinema adapted. Directors learned to move their cameras again. Recording technology improved. Microphones became more sensitive and easier to conceal. The actors who came to film after the transition brought different training. Many arrived from Broadway or radio, and they had a different relationship with voice, the rhythm of spoken dialogue, and sonic presence. What silent cinema had built did not disappear. It remained in the way films were edited, in the use of the close-up, in the understanding that an image carries its own power and does not always need words to explain it. There is one image that captures something essential about all of this. A camera sealed inside a padded wooden box, motionless at the center of a set, while an actor leans slightly toward a microphone hidden among the furniture. The camera cannot follow him if he moves. The microphone cannot reach him if he steps away. Every element of the space has been redesigned so the sound comes through clean. And in that fixed frame, in that small technical constraint, you can feel the weight of an entire industry learning, through trial and error, that telling a story with images and telling a story with words are two different skills, and that cinema would have to master both at once without surrendering either one.